Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Apalachicola Chattahoochee Flint River Basin Drought and Water webinar for the month of September. My name is Rachel McGuire, and I'm with the Auburn University Water Resources Center located in Auburn, Alabama. If you're new to the webinar, we will have time at the end for comments, questions, and discussion. You can also use the chat function on the GoToMeeting tool panel. And at the end of the webinar, also feel free to unmute yourself to ask questions or raise your hand and I will unmute you. Our speakers today will be David Zierden, the Florida State climatologist at the Florida Climate Center at Florida State University. He will present our current drought status, as well as our seasonal forecast and outlooks. We also have Tom Littlepage, Branch Chief of the Alabama Office of Water Resources with the State of Alabama input. Paul Inkhorn, a hydrologist with the USGS South Atlantic Water Science Center with our stream flows and groundwater conditions. We have Jody Wan from the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers Mobile District for our ACF reservoir conditions update. We also have Samantha Lucas of the Apalachicola Bay National Estuarine Research Reserve with salinity information in the Apalachicola Bay. And we will finish up with Jeff Dober of the National Weather Service's Southeast River Forecast Center with our stream flow forecast for the basin. With that, I will turn it over to our first speaker, David Zierden, when you are ready.
Okay, yeah, I'm ready. Thanks, Rachel, and welcome to the September webinar. We'll go ahead and get started with what's currently in the news, and that's we're still in the midst of a very active hurricane season, the second really active season in a row. Since our last webinar, portions of the Southeast and portions of the ACF Basin have been impacted by three different storms. First up was Hurricane Ida, made landfall on August 30th, I believe, as a Cat 4 hurricane in coastal Louisiana. We all seen the tremendous damage the wind and storm surge and even the heavy rains from Ida caused, not just along the Louisiana coast, but all the way up into the Northeast, New York and New Jersey. However, thankfully, it didn't have a tremendous impact on the ACF Basin itself. As we see over here on the right, the rainfall totals from August 31st, heavy rainfall of 4 to 5 inches or more along the Alabama-Mississippi border. However, as we get over into the eastern side of Alabama and western Georgia, very much more moderate amounts. So not a lot of wind damage in the ACF itself, and not necessarily a lot of rainfall either. Then next up was Tropical Storm Mindy, which formed right off the Florida Panhandle on September 9th and came ashore at St. Vincent's Island. A funny story, my wife and I now split time at St. George Island right next door. And she was down there, and I look at the radar and I call her up. I'm like, you know, you're right in the eye of a tropical storm right now. And she said, oh, well, I'm outside at an oyster bar and it stopped raining. So not a lot of impacts from Mindy, thank goodness. It did bring some widespread rain across the Florida Panhandle and southern Georgia and even into the Carolinas, as we see over on the right. And then finally, we had Hurricane Nicholas that made landfall along the Texas coast on September 14th as a Category 1 storm, where it really stalled and dissipated in place over South Louisiana. And this was more of a rainmaker, very heavy rainfall for the Louisiana coast, where they were still recovering from Hurricane Ida, and even heavier amounts across South Alabama and middle Georgia, as we see there, with the yellow and orange indicating amounts of 2 to 4 inches. So impacts of 3 tropical systems just in the last month along the northern Gulf Coast. That makes six landfalls from tropical systems in 2021, following 10 tropical system landfalls along the northern Gulf Coast in 2020. So we really have been a focus of activity in the last 2 years. So with that, we'll go on to the next slide. And this is the 5-day outlook from the National Hurricane Center. Kind of the center of attention is Hurricane Sam, which as of this morning was still at Category 4 strength. But as we see on the left, the projected track will keep it out over the open ocean, which is definitely good news for a storm this strong and powerful. But there are also other areas of interest that show a high probability of development off the coast of Africa and out in the open Atlantic. While looking at this graphic, it appears they might follow a similar track and stay out in the open ocean. They are very far south, a very low latitude for storm formation. So we always have to keep an eye on if things can change and they take a more westerly track. So that's what's tapped for the next 5 days. Luckily, there's no development anticipated in the Caribbean or Gulf of Mexico, which is much more likely to threaten us. But the tropical season is only one part of the story for what's been a very wet or soggy summer and growing season across the entire Southeast. And these two graphics kind of tell the story. This is year-to-date rainfall statistics for the Southeast from about a week ago. And what we see over on the left is the departures from normal, where we have locations along the Florida Panhandle, Apalachicola, Pensacola, Mobile, with rainfall surpluses since January 1st of over 20 inches. And we see a similar story as we go up into inland Georgia and Alabama, 17 inches above normal. In Geneva, even the Birmingham area is 11 to 12 inches above normal. Not quite as much in the Atlanta area, but the whole region showing rainfall surpluses since January 1st. And that certainly continued throughout the summer season. Over on the right is a different side of this story. And while most stations are showing a surplus, it's not necessarily the amount of rainfall, but it's the frequency and timing of rainfall. Where here over on the right, I show the number of days with measurable rainfall since January 1st. And we see in the 120s across the Florida Panhandle and Mobile. It's hard to read. Over 100 in Gainesville, much of Alabama, more than 100 days of measurable rainfall, which is nearly every other day or at least every third day. So it's been the frequency of rainfall that's been just as impactful as the actual amounts. So with that, we'll go ahead on the next slide and start talking about drought, which, as you could anticipate, there's not a lot to talk about there. Most of the Southeast is drought free. We see a few pockets of D0 or abnormally dry in the Piedmont of the Carolinas and Virginia. But even if we looked at the bigger national map, almost all of the eastern United States, east of the Mississippi, is drought free right now. So it's really been a story of plentiful rainfall in the eastern United States, where over in the western United States, this multi-year drought continues. Really dire dryness and drought conditions over much of the western U.S. Lake Powell at its all-time historic low. So they're in the midst of a multi-year or mega drought that'll take several years to recover from. So we'll go ahead on the next slide and focus back on the Southeast United States. We always like to look at the Lawn and Garden Moisture Index, which is really good for short-term indicators at this time of year. And as you would anticipate, most of the Southeast is showing up as quite moist. A few dry pockets in north central Georgia, Southeast Alabama, but really nothing out of the ordinary and in good shape for this time of year. Actually, when growers and a lot of producers and farmers are looking forward to drier weather to help with harvest. So on the next slide, we'll start looking at recent rainfall, and these are the radar-based estimates from the National Weather Service, and this first one is accumulated totals over the last week or 7 days. And we see we've been in a drying trend. We had our first cold front of the year and high pressure, so it's been a welcome break from this very muggy and frequent rainfall we've seen most of the summer. As we see little to no rainfall across South Alabama. Down in South Florida, the rainy season is still continuing, but throughout Georgia and most of the ACF, very little rainfall over the past week. But on the next slide, if we look back further, now we start to see where the wet conditions were. Very heavy rainfall amounts over the last 30 days over coastal Louisiana. The white areas are over 20 inches from the combined effects of Hurricane Ida and also Nicholas. Heavy amounts across the Florida Panhandle. Lesser amounts as we move inland and into the middle and upper ACF basin, but still above normal over the past 30 days. And on the next slide, instead of looking at amounts, we're going to look at departures from normal over the past 90 days. And here we see the entire region is much above normal over the last 3 months, a little more scattered over central Georgia, but all of Alabama is very moist, almost all of the state of Florida, eastern Mississippi, all much above normal rainfall. So on the next slide, we'll start looking ahead, and this is the 7-day or week 1 quantitative precipitation forecast from the National Weather Service. And we see here in the southeast, it looks like we're going to continue to have a break from the rainfall as the subtropical high kind of sets up over the southeast United States. Different story for Texas, where a digging trough and upper level low will provide plentiful rainfall for the state of Texas and Oklahoma and the Great Plains over the next week. On the next slide, we'll start looking further ahead, and we'll look at the Pacific Ocean, where it looks more and more certain that we'll have a second year of La Nina conditions. These are the current sea surface temperature anomalies where you're starting to see that really well-defined pattern of colder than normal sea surface temperatures across the equator. Down at the bottom is our Nino 3.4 index, which went into the neutral range through much of the summer, June and July, but has now returned to borderline La Nina conditions and is hovering around that negative half-degree threshold, which would delineate La Nina conditions in the Pacific Ocean. So it looks like it's still coming on. On the next slide, we'll look at the forecast. Now the official NOAA and CPC IRI consensus forecast calls for nearly an 80% chance of La Nina conditions setting in by this fall, the November, December, January timeframe. Looking at the model predictions over on the right, nearly all of the models forecast colder than normal sea surface temperatures in that Nino 3.4 region. Not necessarily a moderate or strong event, but the model consensus is clearly indicating La Nina conditions as we proceed through the fall and into the winter months. Also, what I'm not showing is looking at the subsurface temperatures. There's a large pool of colder than normal water along the equator beneath the surface, so there's ample support at depth for a continuing or strengthening La Nina. And on this slide, we'll just quickly review the typical La Nina impacts, where we get a jet stream configuration with ridging in the western United States, troughing over the Mississippi Valley, but generally the northern Gulf Coast and the lower southeast is left warmer and drier than normal in the fall and winter when we have La Nina conditions in the Pacific Ocean. And while the disclaimer, this did not happen last year during La Nina conditions, but that's one of those infrequent exceptions where we didn't get the typical response. And Down at the bottom just shows the composites for rainfall month by month throughout the fall, September, October, and November. And what we see is in September, that wet patch on the southern Louisiana coast, that's probably due to a couple outlier years, not necessarily a large scale pattern. But the take home message is the dryness across the Southeast really doesn't start setting in until November. But keep in mind, October is one of our driest months. So dry conditions in November on top of climatologically dry October can usually mean a drying trend across the Southeast. So with that in mind, we'll look at the official CPC seasonal outlook for October through December. Over on the left is the temperature outlook. Both of these really reflect the influence of La Nina conditions. Above normal temperatures are favored across the entire southern United States, especially in the desert Southwest. And over on the right, rainfall, again, below normal rainfall is favored across Texas, Arizona, New Mexico, and also favored across the northern Gulf Coast and the Southeast United States for the next 3 months. The final slide, I think, will be the seasonal drought outlook, which doesn't have a lot of information. As I said before, there's very little evidence of drought anywhere east of the Mississippi River, so it's really not forecast to develop anytime in the next 1 to 3 months. So with that, we'll go ahead and, I'm sorry, one more slide. In the past webinars, we've reviewed the official hurricane season forecast, but now that we're almost or past the peak of hurricane season, let's just look at climatology. And over on the left just shows the average tropical activity in the Atlantic Basin, and we see that it tends to peak around September 10th. So the good news is we are past the peak. The bad news is as we proceed through the month of October, there's still climatologically a lot of tropical activity in the Atlantic Basin. So we're definitely not out of the woods yet, even though we're past the peak of the season. And over on the right, it shows for the first third of October, kind of historically the preferred points of development for tropical systems. And we see that the mid-Atlantic, the main development region between the Windward Islands and Africa, is still fairly active, and we can still develop these long track hurricanes. But the take home message is now the Western and Northwest Caribbean and also the Southern Gulf of Mexico is now a real focal point for tropical development. And so storms that develop there have a much better chance of going into the Gulf and affecting our area. So we'll have to watch the Western Caribbean and Gulf of Mexico closely over the next month. So we'll go ahead and summarize. We did see 3 tropical systems make landfall and have some impact on the ACF basin since our last webinar, but mostly indirect impacts and rain systems. Between the tropical systems and just persistent troughing across the eastern United States, we've had a very wet summer, both in rainfall amounts and especially in the frequency and timing of rainfall. So the Southeast United States is nearly drought free right now. Very little prospect for drought to develop in the near term. We did have our first cold front of the year and a drier pattern over the last week, and that dry pattern looks to continue for the next 7 days or so. But we did have much above normal rainfall when we're looking at the 30 to 90 day time frame. We are nearing La Nina conditions currently in the Pacific Ocean with 80% chance or so of them developing in the next 1 to 3 months. So it's looking more and more certain that we will be dealing with La Nina conditions again this fall and winter. With that in mind, the CPC seasonal forecast favor above normal temperatures and below normal rainfall, again consistent with La Nina conditions. And while we are past the peak, the climatological peak of hurricane season, still a very active month to come in what's been a very active year, and we can look for development to be more likely in the Western Caribbean and Gulf of Mexico.
Thanks for the update, David. And now I'll turn it over to Tom Littlepage with the State of Alabama input when you're ready, Tom.
Well, hello again, everybody. Go ahead to the first slide, Rachel. Basically, this has been the story for since May for us, and I'm certainly not complaining. We have continued to be, I don't know if I want to call it the benefit of some of these conditions, because in many cases we've gotten too much water, and there's certainly a negative aspect to that as well. But from a drought perspective, it has allowed us to stay drought free for a long time, and it currently looks like it's going to continue that trend. Okay, next slide. So as a result of this, we have not modified our drought declaration since May, when we took the last remaining portions of the D0 that was, or the advisory level that was showing on the map off. So we continue to have a clear state level drought declaration. Next slide. But we are continuing to monitor conditions, and so we've actively updated, or weekly we update our website to provide upgraded information on stream flows, and to the degree we are experiencing any conditions, we reflect that there. Okay, next slide. And essentially, as a result of what you see here, we have no water availability issues. We're going to have the next meeting of our technical advisor group, we call the Monitoring and Impact Group, is scheduled for next Tuesday, and anybody is certainly welcome to attend that meeting. It'll be available via webinar, as well as available to attend in person. And I guess with that, I'll just close it out and ask if there's any questions.
Thanks, Tom. And we'll have time for questions if you have some for Tom at the end of the webinar as well. Okay, now moving on to our stream flows and groundwater conditions. Paul had some audio technical difficulties, so I am going to attempt to cover for him. I apologize in advance for my presentation. We'll start off with the real-time stream flow compared to historical stream flow for this time of year. Our previous brief in August is on the left, and our current stream flow conditions are on the right. You can see most of the ACF basin is in the normal to much above normal status. Also, our previous brief with the 7-day average stream flow is on top, and the figure below is as of yesterday. You can see the absence of indications of hydrological drought in the ACF basin. Starting with our 28-day average stream flows at Chattahoochee River near Cornelia. Currently, stream flows are in the 95th percentile, much above normal near Cornelia, and same for Chastity River near Dahlonega. Downstream of Lake Lanier, Chattahoochee at Atlanta is trending right at the 95th percentile, much above normal. Chattahoochee near Whitesburg is also in the much above normal, above 95th percentile. Downstream to Chattahoochee at West Point, once again, much above normal, at 95th percentile or above. And once again, Chattahoochee at Columbus is trending in the much above normal 28-day average stream flow. Switching over to the Flint River near Griffin, stream flows are a bit lower, but still in the upper end of normal, near the 70th to 75th percentile, and a little bit higher downstream at Flint River near Carsonville, above the 76th percentile in the above normal category. Flint River at Albany is also near the 76th to 80th percentile, above normal, and the Flint River at Bainbridge is trending into the much above normal category, the 95th percentile or above. And then lastly, the Apalachicola River at Chattahoochee is above the 95th percentile and much above normal. So as we've already heard from David and Tom, we have a lot of water. We have high flows right now, almost throughout the entire basin. Moving on to groundwater conditions, they range within the ACF anywhere from below normal to much above normal. The previous brief from August is on the left once again, and our current brief is on the right. So you can see that our stream flows have increased since our last briefing in late August. And now we'll move on to those two reference wells that are circled in red. The first of which is in Miller County. And you can see that stream flows increased pretty drastically at the beginning of September. And the second reference well in Dougherty County shows a similar trend of increased stream flow this month. So in summary, our real-time stream flow in the ACF Basin are currently in the much above normal to low range. The below normal 7-day average stream flow indicates that the ACF is hydrologically drought-free. Our 28-day average stream flows for the Chattahoochee are overall in the much above normal range, and the same 28-day stream flows for the Flint are also in the much above normal to normal range. Real-time groundwater levels are currently ranked much above normal and above normal respectively. And now I will turn it over to Jody Wan with our ACF reservoir conditions when you are ready, Jody.
Thank you, Rachel. If you could go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So first off, at the very top of the ACF Basin, we have Beaufort and Lake Lanier. So as Rachel or what Rachel just previously said,
Jody, we lost your audio.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. I don't know what happened. But as I was saying before, the Beaufort and Lake Lanier have been seeing some extra rainfall due to the 3 tropical events that we've had. So we are slightly above tropical conservation. We're using that to save up for the anticipated dryness that we're getting in the next month or so, according to previous presenters. If you go to the next slide, please. Also with the Walter F. George, it's looking like we are also transitioning once more to our winter pool level, same as Lanier, on October 1st. And from there, it looks like we're in a pretty good shape right now. We're holding steady at 189.5, and we're hoping to keep that steady throughout October due to the dryness. Next slide, please. Oops, I might have accidentally inputted the wrong picture, but I can speak for West Point. West Point's a little bit different. The winter pool drawdown is not October 1st, it's November 1st, so we're keeping it a bit higher than the other 2 projects. We're hoping to keep it at a good 634.5, which is half a foot below top of conservation. This is just to anticipate if there's any rain events that do occur that happen right over the reservoir and such, then we'll have that extra space. Lastly, at Jim Woodruff, we're looking to ramp down currently, and it's looking like it's going to be happening pretty soon throughout this next week. We're hoping to save a bit of water because it's looking like it's dry for the next week or so. Hopefully inflows don't drop out and bottom out. But we have the extra water accounted for in the flood storage in our upper basins. Go to the next slide, please. So right now the ACF Basin composite conservation flood storage is in zone 1. We're looking pretty good going into October and going into November, slightly above. So we're in a pretty good shape with all the extra rainstorms that we've been getting. We can go to the next slide. So in total, Lake Lanier is above guide curve. We are working right now to bring the reservoir elevation closer to 1071 over the next several days. So you'll see some increased discharges and generation at Lake Lanier. Lake Lanier and Walter F. George will be transitioning to winter pool elevation beginning October 1st. That winter pool for Lake Lanier is looking at 1070 for pool elevation, and then Walter F. George is, I believe, 188. And West Point's pool transition is tentatively scheduled for November 1st, and this is if all the projects are still within Zone 1. If one of the projects do go into Zone 2, we may have to begin the winter pool transition a bit earlier than November 1st. All projects are within Zone 1, and we are currently meeting all downstream minimum flow requirements. The ACF conservation storage is in Zone 1 and is forecasted to remain in Zone 1 for the next few weeks.
All right, thank you for that update, Jody. Now I'm going to turn it over to Samantha Lucas with Apalachicola Bay daily average salinity levels. When you're ready, Sam.
All right, thank you, Rachel, and hi, everyone. This month, we have an update through the middle of September. As always, we'll be checking out the data from 3 of our water quality stations within the Apalachicola Bay system. These stations log data all year long at 15-minute intervals. And if you look at the map, our 3 stations are labeled. One of our stations is in East Bay, which functions as the nursery area of the system. Then we have Cap Point and Dry Bar at opposite sides of the bay. They are both located on historic oyster bars. And we can move on to the next slide. All right, so this update for Cap Point is through September 20th. Salinity has been low in September, and the values dip down lower than it traditionally has around September 10th. If you look at that big white area, this area experienced quite a bit of rain, as we've been discussing, from the end of August through September, and the river discharge levels are elevated. As David mentioned, Tropical Storm Mindy made a landfall on September 9th in our area, which definitely contributed to the amount of rainfall we received and coincides well with the salinity numbers we see at our stations. At all 3 stations, you're going to see we have a really low point around that. It's about September 10th to September 13th, which I would attribute to tropical storms, as well as it's been raining almost every day here during that period in September. So I'll be interested to see what else happens for the rest of the month at Cap Point. We did get quite a bit of bands off of Hurricane Nicholas, so I am predicting the salinity levels to be low, but you know what, you never know, so we'll have to see what happens next month. All right, we can go ahead and check out Dry Bar. All right, so Dry Bar is going to follow a similar pattern. There is quite a large decrease that occurs throughout September, and this update is through September 14th. The lowest number occurred on the 13th, all right, and that is that point right there. And very similar to Cap Point, it goes down lower than it traditionally has as well. So all of our salinity levels are quite low this month. All right, and we can go on to East Bay. All right, and for East Bay, this update is through September 15th. There are normal fluctuations occurring at the station. The lowest number we saw was on September 12th. And again, this corresponds with the other stations. They're all experiencing low numbers around that time. And the majority of the values that we see here at the station fall within the lower percentile ranges. So everything is quite low. And I will tell you, when we go out on the bay with our equipment right now, all of our readings at the surface and the bottom are lower than they have been as well. All right, and we can move on to the next slide. Thank you. So in summary, we have experienced quite a lot of rain in the system. We're seeing lower salinity values, rivers discharges attributing to this as well, but currently Cap Point salinity values are within the 10th to 24th percentile range as of September 20th, and they have remained low throughout the month. Dry Bar salinity values peaked on September 1st, then decreased throughout the month. They're currently within the lowest percentile range. And then our East Bay bottom salinity values experience a small fluctuation, but have remained within lower percentile ranges overall. All right, and then all 3 stations experienced their lowest values near the middle of the month.
All right, thank you for the update, Sam. Sounds like y'all have had a lot of water.
Yes, we have. All right, thank you.
And now we'll wrap things up with Jeff Dober with our streamflow forecast. When you're ready, Jeff.
Okay, thank you, Rachel. So let's look at our 10-day short-term ensemble streamflow forecast, and we start at the top here at Lake Lanier, Buford. This is the potential inflows into the project using the North American Ensemble Forecast System as the input into the rainfall input into the modeling system. And we can see, as what we were talking about, it looks dry over the next couple of weeks, and flows remaining, inflows remaining pretty steady, if not falling, through most of really through most of into next week. And then we get into some variability out there on the 5th, 6th, and 7th, where we do have some chance at some rainfall, which could increase inflows into the project. So that's for Lake Lanier, and we'll sort of see the same idea down the ACF. Again, here's at Whitesburg. Again, pretty quiet as far as flows. Not much changes, not much rainfall over the next week. We'll go to the next one here. Now we're on the top of the Flint River here at Lovejoy. More of the same, no real fluctuations, nothing significant expected, and of course no high flows or flooding expected. And let's go down the Flint to Albany, and again, pretty much the same flows expected to drop off or remain the same over the next 10 days. And then finally at Bluntstown, the next slide, you can see the stages falling off there quite a bit, as you know, of course, as well as the flows there on the lower Apalachicola. So we'll go to the next slide, and that's the next 10 days, pretty quiet. As far as we're in week 39, this is typically a sort of a middle part of our secondary season there, week 39, and that's mainly with tropical systems. That's always the caveat this time of year. But otherwise, it's generally quiet. Again, week 39, usually you can see there week 40, 41, and then we get into 42. That would put us into mid-October. And that is usually one of our quietest times of the year as far as flooding for the Georgia rivers. So as far as the 30-day outlook, what it looks like, as pointed out, looks pretty dry the next couple of weeks. And that'll be the trend, I think, through most of the month. And so right now, some of those points that Paul had pointed out that we've got in the above normal range probably will start to fall off in near normal range, and really we look pretty good as far as stream flow. We're calling for near normal stream flows across most of the ACF for the month of October. And then as far as October, November, December, almost carrying us into the beginning of the next year here, the pie charts give the highest probability of near normal conditions. The second highest probabilities are above normal, with generally a 1 in 5, 1 in 6 chance at below normal stream flows for our critical points there. But for the most part, it looks like we're calling for, there may be some fluctuations, of course, if we get some heavier rain events or a tropical system. But for the most part, we're looking at near normal stream flow for that 3-month period. To take us at the end of the year. And so in summary, no flooding expected in the next 10 days. Again, this is leading into a quiet time of year as we get into mid-October. And so right now we're looking at near normal stream flows for both 1 month and through the 3-month to carry us through 2021. Again, if you want more information on our 10-day guidance forecast, to see other points on the ACF, you can go to our MMEFS webpage there, and as well as if you want our official river stage forecast, there's the URL for that as well. And that's all I had.
Thank you, Jeff. I have one thing to mention before we open it up for questions and discussion. We have a few remaining slots for the upcoming ACF Drought Dashboard Interactive Review webinars for the date of October 22nd. That webinar is going to be from 10 a.m. to 12 p.m. Eastern. As I mentioned, just a few spots are left. We are limiting it to a slightly smaller group because there is a strong interactive component to this. And this will give an opportunity for you to see the prototype of the ACF drought dashboard that we've been working on for quite a while now. If you would like to fill one of those slots, reach out to Kristen Rouse. That is her email. I'll also provide this information in the follow-up email, and you can wait to reach out to her at that point. So now I'd like to open it up to anyone with questions. You can raise your hand or you can use the chat and I'll repeat your question out to the speakers. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions coming in, so I'll take a little bit of time to thank our speakers again: David Zierden, Tom Littlepage, Paul Inkhorn, Jody Juan, Sam Lucas, and Jeff Dober. Our next webinar will be Tuesday, October 26th, same time, 1 p.m. Eastern, 12 p.m. Central. A video recording of this webinar will be posted online to YouTube within 48 hours, and you'll also receive a summary email of this briefing. Thank you for being here, and if you need to reach out, my contact information is on the bottom left corner. Have a great rest of your Tuesday.